Hi there. Welcome to The Pressure Point. I'm your host, Barbara Anderson. Tonight's program is called A Yearning for the Spirit, as we take a look at the hunger for a deeper spirituality that many people are experiencing in our society and in our churches. Tonight we're joined in that discussion with our special guest, Reverend Elly Bradley. Welcome to The Pressure Point, Elly.
Thanks, Barbara.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background, Elly?
Yeah, ordained United Church clergy in 1959. Then 4 years in parish ministry in Manitoba. I still cheer for the Blue Bombers.
Mm-hmm. Are you from Manitoba?
No, Ontario. Toronto. Grew up in Toronto. Went to Emmanuel College and
but
so on.
But you'll admit that to us here.
Well, the Argos are going to the Grey Cup, yes. And then taught at the University of Winnipeg in the Faculty of Theology for 7 years. And then the Vancouver School of Theology for 12. And my wife and family and I decided that the time had come to leave VST, and we took a year out. And I'm just now coming back off that. This is the beginning of the first year of the rest of our lives. And I say that not because it's kind of a glib thing to say, but because we really are trying a different lifestyle. I'm freelancing. That's my short answer to the question when people ask me what I'm doing.
Freelancing in what kind of area would you say?
Well, I have a friend in Prince Rupert who has a way with words, and she says, what you're doing is freelancing holiness. Mm-hmm. There's a little twist in that, but if you want a short answer, that's about as accurate an answer as I could give. What I'm in fact finding myself doing is responding to people's requests, almost all of which, in one way or another, boil down to help us learn to pray. So that's what I'm doing. And I lead retreats and do spiritual direction and teach groups of people in that area.
So it's appropriate that we come to this discussion with you then, because as I was just mentioning in the opening, there seems to be a real hunger for spirituality, and if people are coming and asking you, saying, teach me to pray,
yeah.
What are you finding out there? Are you sensing that to be true, that there is a real hunger?
I think there's no doubt about it. And my suspicion is it will grow. I don't know how important it is to speculate about where that hunger comes from.
I was going to ask you, where does it come from?
Well, it's interesting to speculate whether it's important or not. I think what's important is to respond to it. Where does it come from? Well, I think it comes from a variety of sources, frankly, and part of it's social commentary, strangely enough. My suspicion is, this is true for me, but it's true for many people that I know, that life in Vancouver, in beautiful British Columbia, in Canada at this time, in the world, is stripping us of a lot of illusions that we've had.
Stripping us by what? What do you mean by that?
Well, the illusion of mastery, for example, that I was thinking today in anticipation of this time with you, of the 60s and We Shall Overcome, the Kennedy era. A kind of muscle flexing, that there were problems to be sure, but with our ingenuity, with our goodwill, with our competence and so on, they would surely be resolved. I don't think there is that sense anymore in our society.
We've lost that idealism or that innocence in a sense?
I don't think it's idealism that we've lost so much, although in part that may be so. I think we've become more aware of the obstacles and less hopeful that there is anyone who has the big key, like that there is any political figure, for example, or any political party, or anybody else who can bail us out of the various crises, the data of despair, if you like, as someone has said, with which we are inundated every day on our television screens and from the newspapers and over our kitchen tables. I think that's part of it, the illusion of mastery. I think also more of us are becoming less committed to society's value system, to society's way of perceiving reality. Like the threadbareness of all that, if you like, is becoming more evident. And I want to speak precisely about that. That's not so much causing people to pray as it is opening people to prayer. The illusions, in other words, being exposed as such, remove obstacles that then allow us to pray as previously we haven't been either able to do or wanting to do, so long as we operated on the basis of those illusions.
So as long as we could pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, as long as everything we had seemed to fill our needs.
Seemed to be working.
Seemed to be working.
Yeah.
I think when we talked last time that was it Rabbi Kushner had something, written something about that. Is that appropriate at this time?
Well, I think so. I brought Kushner along. It's Kushner's most recent book that lots of people are reading. I think the title is worth the price of the book, and it's very accurate. When all you've ever wanted isn't enough. I know a lot of people, and probably you do too, not people who haven't made it, but people who have made it in whatever terms they set out to make it in, who are saying exactly that. Having all that they wanted, now having all that they wanted, they find is not enough. Do we have time for me to read a paragraph or two?
I'd like you to read that, if you would.
There are a couple of things in here, it seems to me, in the opening paragraphs where Kushner gets us all. Ask the average person, he says, which is more important to him, making money or being devoted to his family, and virtually everyone will answer family without hesitation. But watch how the average person actually lives out his life. See where he really invests his time and energy, and he'll give away the fact that he does not really live by what he says he believes. He has let himself be persuaded that if he leaves for work earlier in the morning and comes home more tired at night, he is proving how devoted he is to his family by expending himself to provide them with all the things they've seen advertised. And he goes on, another one. Ask the average person which means more to her, the approval of strangers or the affection of people closest to her, and she won't be able to understand why you'd even ask such a question. Obviously, nothing means more than her family and her closest friends. Yet how many of us have embarrassed our children or squelched their spontaneity for fear of what neighbors or strangers might think? How often have we poured out our anger on those closest to us because we had a hard day at work or someone else did something to upset us? And how many of us have let ourselves become irritable with our families because we were dieting to make ourselves look more attractive to people who do not know us well enough to see beyond appearances? Well, I think those paragraphs just get us all.
They hit us right where it hurts, in a sense, don't they?
Yeah. Simple, everyday stuff. And what I'm saying is I perceive more and more people to be aware of the contradictions that life and society, as we've all been formed to live it, puts us in. And we are increasingly distressed at those, and many of us unwilling any longer to bear them.
Okay, so we have a feeling of the spiritual hunger or yearning out there. What are the implications of that for the church, say for congregations, for the clergy? What does that mean? Are the churches not, in a sense, filling that void? Or is it up to them to fill it? Or is it up to them to offer something?
I think, first of all, it's an enormous sign of hope for the church. It is potentially life for the church, in my judgment, because what it's about is a press for depth. Beneath busyness, beneath the exhaustion that many people feel in congregational life, it's a press to be put in touch with God, who nourishes us. Not who exhausts us, but who nourishes us. So I think it's a great sign of hope for the church. The question is, how will we respond to that? And the churches have been much better, in my judgment, in telling us that we ought to pray, for example, than in helping us know how to pray. So if the churches will respond to those who say, help us pray, by providing that help, then I think that hope will be in the process of being realized. Now, it's not easy to respond to that. It suggests some changes in the ways in which we worship, for example, on Sunday morning, in the kind of lifestyle that a congregation lives, which at the moment is so busy that in many places there's really no room for a congregation to be a house of prayer.
So many committees, so many events happening, that prayer is often the thing that's most overlooked, I would say. It seems to me that often you go to meetings and so on, and it becomes a tag-on or something.
Or a way of calling a meeting to order.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much doubt that for people who are at the beginning stage, and there are very many of them, people who are saying, we want to pray but don't know how, help us. that the crunch question is, how do we find the time? And my perception of congregational life very often, and I'm not down on congregations, I'm nourished by congregations, but my perception of congregational life is rather than opening time and space for people, the congregation more often draws them in and occupies space, fills space. So doesn't help us find time, takes time, adds to the demands and the burdens that we feel. So at the end of a packed day, for example, and this is as much your life as it has been my life, at the end of a packed day, instead of being home with my wife and family, I go off to a meeting. And I don't find myself being nourished in that meeting. I'm about good things, to be sure, but I don't find myself being nourished. I find myself being further drained. I think that's got to change.
How would we change it? I mean, if someone were to go to their pastor, their clergy person, and say, "Help me to pray," would they get the kind of answer that would help them?
It's coming, Barbara. It's coming. I think there's no doubt about that. My perception is that ministry and the understanding of what it consists in and whose ministry it is in the process of change. And I take that to be another hopeful sign. Not change because the literature is saying, for example, that it needs to change, but fewer and fewer pastors are able any longer to avoid taking seriously that question, help us pray, because more and more pastors are being driven to see their own need for that. No longer adequate, no longer feeling adequate for what the day puts on their plate. And so, becoming themselves persons of prayer, it seems to me, opens them to be helpful to others who are seeking that.
Is the training that we give to clergy, is it helpful in that area? It seems to me that a lot of times the spiritual dimension is not so much an intellectual dimension as it is a whole other dimension of life, or including the intellectual, but something else. And we have rigorous intellectual training for our clergy, but sometimes one senses or feels that maybe there's other areas that need to be developed as well.
Well, I think there's no question about that. I think also there's no question that that's in the process of change. But once again, just as change in the life of a congregation does not come easily, neither does change in theological education come easily. The change is coming through the pressure of students who are saying, we need to be nourished in order to make it through these days in the seminary. But readiness for prayer is everything. It's absolutely everything. And it's very difficult. I know what I'm talking about. It's very difficult for a seminary to do spiritual formation, and that's the area that you're speaking in, given the varying degrees of readiness, and some no readiness at all, on the part of the student body. The Roman Catholics have always been much better at this than Protestant schools. I think I was telling you when last we talked that Jesuits, for example, in their beginning year as part of the Jesuit order, when they're still novices, at the very earliest stage of being a novice, do a 40-day retreat. Well, you can't tell me that that doesn't transform the theological education that they receive subsequently. I'm not suggesting that there ought to be necessarily a Protestant counterpart to that, but I do agree with you. Theological education needs to be grounded, experientially grounded, in the realities about which it speaks. Now, let me not give the impression that doesn't happen to any degree. That would be far from true. The life of VST, for example, is centered in the chapel. There's just no doubt about that. And there are a variety of spiritualities evident in the curriculum. But I don't know a single Protestant theological seminary in North America where spiritual formation could be said to be the organizing principle of the curriculum. And that's, I think, what you're at least moving toward.
So that the intellectual doesn't overbalance the other side, I think is what we were talking about.
Well, is it Nowen? I no longer remember whose words these are. I've made them my own because I think they're absolutely true. If it is Nowen, someone says, in any case, that the Christian faith is not an affair of the mind alone, nor of the heart alone. It is an affair of the mind and the heart. And I believe that to be profoundly true.
And both of those have to come together.
That's right. That's right.
Let me just go back to help us to pray, the question that people are asking.
Yeah.
As they come to you and ask that question, what is your response to that?
I respond with enormous eagerness. We began with your question about my background, and I answered very much from the outside point of view. My journey in prayer started 12 years ago, and it's by no means finished yet. But I know personally the power of prayer. I know that God does in fact feed those who are hungry enough to be open to receive the nourishment that is there. So nothing seems more important to me than to be able to be helpful, to be used as vehicle. And see, that's the kind of ministry we're talking about. We're not any longer, I think, talking about ministry as my ministry, what I produce, what I manufacture out of my gifts and abilities and energy. We are talking about ministry as being a vehicle for God's working. Not any longer simply as a slogan, but as a reality in which one bases oneself.
So we get away from the privatistic kind of going away and being nurtured for one's own development, but ignoring the world, as it were. You're talking about doing it for embracing the world.
That is very important. The hunger that we've been speaking about, and the title of this segment, there are many different causes for it, and it takes many directions. There's just no doubt about that. What I want to support, and many would want to support, is the kind of spirituality that nourishes for engagement. It is not that I take myself out and walk with Jesus in the garden alone and feel good about that. Like, it is not just for me. This treasure is given to be shared. So what I find happening is people saying, I can't live the faith in my job, in my kitchen, in my shopping center. I can't live the faith unless I live out of the faith. But my living out of the faith is to help me live the faith Monday through Saturday and not simply on Sunday. So it's very much nourishment for engagement.
And that's, I think we think of a lot of people, I know many within the churches who have gone out and tried to engage the world in social justice concerns and been out there and have been literally or virtually burned out without having that nourishment. So that the two need to go together.
I think there's no doubt about that. And the debate that often arises between people on the one hand who say the Christian faith is about social justice, and those on the other hand who say the Christian faith is about intimacy with God, must talk to each other. The Christian faith is surely about both. And the engagement on behalf of justice cannot be sustained. That's surely the lesson of the 60s and the 70s, apart from nourishment from God, about which we're speaking. On the other hand, nourishment from God is for the sake of, in part, for the sake of that social justice. The God who loves me loves you and the poor in the world. I cannot be intimate with this God without also being sent on their behalf. It's not a private party that we're in.
That's important. I think that's very important.
Crucial.
Let's just go back again to prayer. You talked about, when we talked earlier, about a specific kind of prayer, that there are different kinds of prayers, and yours was a different kind that was taught to you by the Jesuits. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. My perception would be that many of us have a very narrow view of what prayer is, and one of the things that I try to do with people who ask for help in that area is to broaden the understanding. Many of us begin at the point of thinking that prayer is what happens when I sit in a chair and close my eyes and talk. Well, that is one understanding of prayer, but there are many others. One of the happy things, this hunger that we've been talking about, is met by just an indescribable wealth of resources in the Christian heritage. I know nothing about the others, and I'm sure they are also rich. The resources of the Christian heritage to meet this hunger are almost infinite in variety and kind.
We're looking at different traditions through history?
Different traditions, different communities that exist now. For example, the Taizé community, that will be a familiar name to at least some of the viewers. The Taizé community has an enormous amount to offer us in respect to meditative singing, for example. Not many people think of meditative singing as a form of prayer, but it clearly is. And the Taizé canons are not only great fun to sing and quickly learned, but they are also very strong expressions of prayer. The Jesuits have a couple of classic ways of prayer that are premised on the matter that prayer is first of all listening, and only then is it speaking. Like prayer is dialogue, and so the Jesuits are known for praying the scriptures, and as I say, there are a couple of methods for doing that.
And can you just explain a little more praying the scriptures for our viewers who may not know what you mean by that?
Yeah, the methods vary at one special point, but essentially what one does is have a passage. One sits down, relaxes, becomes as calm as possible, acknowledges the presence of God and one's own state. Lord, I'm frazzled today. That's just who I am at this moment. Calm me. Then reads the passage. If it's the meditative method, reads it and reads it and reads it in a reflective way, with this question in mind: what is this passage saying to me? Not what is the passage saying. That's the historical critical methodology question,
yes.
And an important question. It's just not the question when one is praying the scriptures. What is this passage saying to me? And the effort is not to read it a certain number of times, but to listen, to savor, to appropriate. Then one breaks for a little while and then does a review, like jots some notes about what that experience was, what insights came, and so on. That's one method, and one that can be used with any passage of Scripture. The contemplative method, which uses imagination, is very powerful. It's most useful in relation to praying the Gospels. Orthodoxy has an enormous amount to offer us, and we know much too little about the life of 100 million Christians in the world.
Wow.
Yeah. But the Jesus prayer,
we don't know anything about those people, do
well,
we?
virtually nothing. Yeah. Virtually nothing. The Anglican community, I could not personally say enough in gratitude to the Anglican community at VST for the nourishment that came to me through that community and its worship for most of the years that I was at the school. Anglican chants, for example, very strong. We could spend the rest of this evening simply naming resources. And so it's great fun to expose people to those, but not in a head way, like not to tell about resources, but actually to be about using these with some guidance.
So to really explore them with some real intention of gaining some experiential insight into those different traditions that we are not aware of, or we've just neglected or have been ignorant of.
Yeah.
That's
while we've been doing other things, put it that way, being successful, being busy, etc., 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 thank God there have been some communions that have tended those resources so that now those of us who come to this very late in the game are able to draw upon them. Some of the folks who are watching may wonder how a United Church person finds himself hobnobbing with Jesuits and with Anglicans and so on. One of the things that I'm most appreciative for in my heritage as United Church is the openness to receive gifts from others. So when I go to Mass in the morning, as I do, I feel very much that I go there as a United Church person, consistent with my heritage, of openness to those gifts. I find myself very much fed by communions other than my own, as well as by my own.
So if we don't have those particular elements in our own faith tradition, we're certainly, our faith tradition does give us the openness to experience and take them from others.
I think at least gives us the openness. My sense is it may do more than that, and I have to speak with a little caution, a little tentativeness at this point. But my sense is the United Church has always managed to say, we do not have a corner on the truth. And implicitly, if not explicitly, then, invites us to look elsewhere to see what truth is there.
So that's an important part of our tradition too, to remember that we're open to that.
Very much so. Very much so. I think also, if we have time to say this.
We have a couple of minutes.
Okay. Yeah. I think also the strength of the linkage between social justice on the one hand and spirituality on the other that you and I have been making is also very much part of our United Church heritage.
Very much so. It goes right back to, I think, the basis of union.
Exactly, and past that, back farther than that. Yeah.
Just before our time is just about up, just wanted to say one thing about worship. Do you find in the worship services a place of meeting those spiritual needs, or do we need to also go beyond that and not just look to that 1 hour to fill all those needs, as some people might be to do?
I think there's no doubt about that. I think it doesn't matter how worship is designed or what it consists in. The need for bread is too urgent and too continuing for us to satisfy those needs or imagine that they could possibly be satisfied in an hour on Sunday morning. I think there's no doubt about that.
So it's important to look to broaden our spiritual dimension in our life in as a daily kind of, perhaps as a daily exercise and discipline.
Well, some of us would want to say that, and one of the negatives in what we're talking about is the word should, in my judgment. That's a word I don't like to use a lot. I find it to be not helpful. My own experience would be I need nourishment daily, and I always come back to the manna passage in Exodus 16, where the manna is provided, the people are hungry, the manna is provided 1 day at a time.
So rather than laying down laws, we need to just be open to what our needs are.
I believe that's true, and if we're ready to ask for help, then to ask for it.
Thank you, Elly, for sharing that with us. Our time is up. But
I'm sorry about that.
I am too. It's been a fascinating subject, and we appreciated talking with you tonight. Could go on again more for another half hour. Thank you for joining us on The Pressure Point. Good evening and God bless.